Hello, 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 and welcome to this episode of the Julia Dispatch podcast. I'm Chris Rackauckas.
And I'm Michael Tiemann. And today we have the wonderful Firoozeh Dastur with us. Hello.
Nice to be on the podcast, please.
And it's a first because this is the first time that someone is back on the show.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
I mean, okay, so Stefan was
yeah, Stefan did beat you.
I think will have been back again.
Oh, yeah, it's not on air yet. But by the time this goes on air, that's going to be on there. So I think we're safe.
But I think it was the with Firoozeh, it was the first time that we already had plans to have someone back. And this is exciting. This is new. So we know you from the earlier episode with the diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. Is that the DEI?
Yes. Where I accidentally popped by because I partially read the emails.
That's it's always wonderful to have people on. And we just had a tiny chance of get to know you. So please tell us more about yourself. For also those people who might not have heard the earlier episode.
Okay, so you already introduced me by name. I would say I'm a theoretical mathematician, although I was not always a theoretical mathematician. I come from Pakistan, from a very small town in the northwestern region. And then we had to move to the southern region due to certain terrorist activities, and we didn't want to get stuck there as a family. So I did after moving to the south, I was already graduating high school, and I ended up doing my first master's in operation research and analysis in Pakistan, but that didn't seem like a right choice for me. And somehow I was more interested in geometry and the algebraic aspects of mathematics. So I found this program in Germany, in Kaiserslautern, where I did my second master's in algebraic geometry, number theory, and computer algebra. And now I started my PhD right after the master's, and I started with a different topic. Somehow things went south with that, so I had to switch topics. And now hopefully I'll finish this year. I'm currently writing my thesis and sending it in draft by draft for my supervisors to review it and suggest changes. And those changes seem to be never ending, but I also appreciate it. I like my thesis to be bug free.
What was the topic that went south, and why was it category theory?
Okay, I have immense respect for category theorists because I don't understand it. But it was actually, the topic was about K3 surfaces. If I start discussing it the way I would explain it to other mathematicians, I might lose you, and I don't want that. So assume it's a surface not in your nice 3D world, but in a higher dimension. And there was I wanted to see if, given two such surfaces, if I can construct a map from one to the other. Theoretically, it's possible. There is a lot of literature on it. Computationally, also, some people say it's possible. I am not a K3 enthusiast, so my work is more like verifying what others are saying is actually true. And
sounds good.
It actually went south for other reasons, which I've left in the past. But I was lucky to find supervisors who took me under their wing. I completely switched topics to something called tropical geometry. And now my thesis is partially K3 surfaces because I worked on it for about 3 years, and the remainder is tropical geometry.
I mean, it sounds like you're doing geometry with climate models, or...
You would wish. The sad part is the name tropical is a complete misnomer. It doesn't have a very interesting story behind it, even though I tried to come up with something interesting. But the name was to honor one of the mathematicians who introduced it to the world.
Oh, okay.
Around, I would say, not it wasn't longer than 50 or 60 years that this topic was created. You can think of it as a piecewise linear counterpart of your regular algebraic geometry.
Okay, that's interesting. And how do you explain your PhD topic to your parents, hoping that they might not be mathematicians?
So these days, I only tell them it's on its way. Don't worry, I'm doing something. I remember sharing a poster, my very first poster, when I was about to present it at a conference, and I sent it to them, and they were like, "Is this still English?" Like, yes, it is. Trust me. Like, this doesn't look like mathematics to me. Like, it is. I can confirm there are mathematicians working on this. But
Yeah. I mean, it's actually getting more popular too, right? I mean, I know that the places where I mostly work with tropical semi-rings is all the work in graph blocks, right? Graph blocks is one major use case of tropical semi-rings, which shows that using standard linear algebra routines on tropical semi-rings gives you solutions to graph problems, and so that's one of the ways that a lot of numerical analysts have been starting to at least start to use tropical algebras and such. So
okay, you can consider it that way. So what I tell my parents is more like, it's I'm working on pattern recognition, and they immediately jump to something like machine learning or AI. I'm like, no, much primitive version of it, but it's
pattern recognition. We're just recognizing where two polynomials intersect. It's good enough.
I mean, my computational work is pretty much, I'm not directly doing any theoretical work. I'm trying to find patterns through which I can deduce certain properties of the curves I'm working with. So I think it's pattern recognition and working with the geometrical structures.
Mm-hmm.
So
then a lot of computational algebra type of work, or
yes and no. What do you mean by computational algebra?
like computational group theory, computational ring theory, and these kinds of directions. Normally, I see that more towards like automated theorem proving, though. Or do you kind of go in a different direction?
So I would say I'm going in a different direction. All the computational tools I need, I'm more or less writing it myself, because at least in Julia, also in other frameworks, I know tropical geometry is not that mature. So at bare minimum, what I need is actually linear algebra capabilities. Because you have to think of it this way. You have tropical curves, which are like translations of your actual or algebraic curves. And then with them comes a dual space, which encodes your tropical curve. So it stores the data of the shape, the structure, the other properties of your curves. I'm working on the dual space, which is pretty much a triangular lattice. So yeah, lattice theoretic computations.
Okay, yeah. I don't know. Most of the people that know did that usually use like p-adic algebras and such, I thought.
No, I'm not really working on those.
Okay.
I mean, that's an interesting topic. I have a few things written down in my to-do list that I want to do once I finish my PhD, but for now I stay away from it.
But okay, so deep into computational algebra is math. That was the math section.
This is a Julia podcast, so let's get that aspect of your work back into the frame. I was very what piqued my interest was that you had also a master's done in operational research. So maybe this might be a hint as to when programming first started, or was this way earlier, or like did you start post Julia and with Julia, or did you already start way before Julia and finally you discovered this beautiful language?
The answer is yes and no. So with operation research, back then I actually didn't realize I was using a GUI tool to do my computations. There was no real programming involved. And then, which is why I was a little sick of it. I was like, okay, I don't want to do anything with computational aspects. Then I come to Germany and I realize I can't run away from it. So during my master thesis, I was working with actually tropically computing Feynman integrals and computing covers for tropical elliptic curves, for which I then had to write a library for another computer algebra system called Singular. I'm not sure if you know it.
We know Singular well, yeah.
If you're saying it that way, I feel sorry for you. But
yeah, I will decline to make my statements on a public podcast like this. Well, let me just say, I started when I was starting to try to use Sage. I was trying to install it on Windows, and back then it only installed by building a virtual machine and then putting it inside of a virtual machine. There was no other way to install it on Windows. So I had some very fun experiences with Singular and Gap through Sage at that time.
Okay, so I luckily never used Gap. Also, I'm very vocal about my displeasure of all computer algebra systems and programming languages. So either everyone will run after me with a pitchfork, or everyone will be happy that I'm complaining about all of them equally. But luckily, I had a Mac back then, so it worked fine installation-wise. But yeah, there is a bit of a learning curve, especially if you've never done programming like me. But I come from a Singular background, and then I didn't start using Julia myself. I was sort of pushed into it during the pandemic, and I was told you have to learn it. Why? Because everyone in the group is using it. And unfortunately, back then, Julia was not in its nicer version, so there was a lot of crying and screaming on my end towards my screen, and like, why aren't you working? I don't understand you. But I'm happy since then it has improved, and I can see the improvement in the language itself and new features coming in with each release, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. So I guess, how would you describe then, these kinds of computational algebra tools? Like, how would you describe, like, at a very high level, what are you actually using a computer to do to someone who isn't an algebraist? I'm curious how you describe it.
Interesting question. There was something I was told once as a child. I read it in a book, or someone told me that mathematicians inherently are very lazy. They will do something properly once in order to never do it again. I look at programming that way. I have theoretical aspects of it, but sometimes it's nice to computationally compute an example or perform some experiments to maybe further the direction of research. And I don't want to do it by hand. I will make a lot of mistakes, and that's why I use computers to do the dirty work for me.
But what's like the core computation that you're doing a lot of, right? A lot of times when people are using some of these tools, they're doing things like, finding intersections of polynomials a lot, or they're finding, like a least common multiplier of terms. Like what's a way for someone to envision, like, it's kind of like, even if it's not perfectly accurate, what's like the best way for someone to be able to envision this kind of computation you're doing here?
I like that question primarily because it might also be a defense question. So let me think about it. Because if I would explain it, what I'm doing, I have my own data structures, but primarily I'm looking into certain, as I said, patterns that occur within this dual space. And based on those patterns, so there are a lot of triangles involved, and the triangles are attached to each other. And this might not make sense to you if you've never seen a tropical curve or its dual space. But I'm trying to find the connection between bitangents to the quartex, or degree 4 curves. It's a classical result that there are 28 bitangent lines to a degree 4 curve over the complex numbers. We translated it into tropical geometry and discovered some similar statement also exists, but then there are arithmetic multiplicities attached to it, which is like fancy word for some invariants that exist because of these tropical bitangents and the quartics. And now the question is, in the parametric space, what percentage of my tropical curves have this particular invariant? And analyzing that is pretty much my current task.
So if I'm to try to summarize this a little bit, I want to kind of pull this up to maybe the highest of high level here. I think that the closest famous, I would say, algebra problem that I know that sounds reasonably close to this is probably something like the four coloring theorem, I think, right? Like the four coloring theorem is one where you say, okay, if you want to color all the countries on a map, and you don't want to make any of the countries touch if they're the same color, how many colors could you use for a map, right? And you're able to prove like, oh, you can always use four colors, right? And you're like, well, why four, right? And they go, well, there's a way that they're able to prove it. The proof ends up being like 1 billion pages long or something, and is generated through a computational algebra tool. But they prove that you could do this if all you need is four colors, because the way that all the lines intersect and everything, if you treat it as polynomials, yada yada yada, you can prove you only ever need four colors, right? So it sounds like that would be like the simple version, and now you're trying to say something about four-dimensional space and how things interact in a four-dimensional space.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, not quite, because in case my supervisor sees this podcast, I have to be clear that not really, but as an analogy, I would say it comes close. Right now, I'm at the stage where we are determining how many colors are actually required, and not really working on why four colors are enough. Because that's a completely different research field, which would probably be easier to solve once my thesis gets published, because there would be computations that would help.
Well, I think I found at least a relative understanding to where you are. Hopefully, the rest of the viewers follow that.
Also, if your supervisor is listening, I mean, during your defense, there will be, I guess, only mathematicians present, so you can talk to them differently than to our listeners, and that's the only reason why you explain it in this way. So you'll be fine.
It's nice to also be able to communicate your research to someone who's not purely a mathematician or a tropical geometer.
So I once tried to communicate my research to a patent attorney, and that was the most painful thing that I've ever done in my life. Give me a layperson anytime. The other thing that I wanted to come back to quickly was your experience of first being confronted with Julia, and then there was, if I remember correctly, the words were crying and screaming involved. So, but was it only born out of necessity and the outside constraints that made you stick with the programming language, or was there something inherently in the language, the ecosystem, the community that also helped over time reduce the amount of frustrational moments?
If I'm being honest, I would say initially it was purely pressure from my previous group I was working in, because I also tried to, when I was learning and I couldn't understand certain aspects of Julia, I was like, can I at least go back to C++ that I'm familiar with? I'm not an expert in C++, but at least I've seen how it works, and there is a lot of resources available. And I know people who can help me out. And I was told no. So the first few years were I wasn't very happy, but I was like, okay, it's just for my PhD. I'm going to finish working with it, and I'm going to be done with it. Recently, well, about a year ago, when after actually JuliaCon, I got a chance to meet a lot of the nicer side of Julia, where people are helpful, and I got to learn also about different aspects of the new Julia, is what gave me hope that I want to continue working with it. I would say it was somewhat because I'm an introvert, I also don't go out and explicitly ask people for help. So it's very difficult for me if I want to find some tool or some package that would be helpful. Also, back in the day, it was pre-ChatGPT times. Now I can ask ChatGPT, like, I want to do this. Is there a Julia package doing that? And usually the answer is yes, and then I can open the documentation and read it. But back then it was, also, since I come from the singular background, I had the mindset that there would be an online manual available, which is in alphabetic order. I just go to the alphabet, I look up the documentation, and I try to understand it. With Julia, it was a little bit different, and it took me some time to get used to accessing documentation or finding forums like Slack where I can ask questions.
And when you started, were you using things like Nemo, Nemo.jl, Oscar.jl, abstractalgebra.jl, and that whole space? Yep.
Are you already in a situation where you would be able to point the finger to what would have helped in, let's say, 2020, 2021? If that would have been there, then your journey into Julia would have been much nicer. So, I mean, ChatGPT, of course, now is something nice to have. But is there anything else that we could learn from your pain?
I gave it a little bit of, I'm not being too harsh on it, because it was also the pandemic, which meant human communication was distanced. But ignoring that, if I was surrounded by people who were willing to answer questions, which is why also during the previous episode, or maybe it was not the previous episode, but during one of my conversations with the other gender inclusive people, I mentioned that we need to promote the Slack group more, because usually when I started looking into problems, which was a habit from C++, that if I have a problem, I will look at Stack Overflow or Discourse or somewhere, and I would find a solution. But I wasn't aware of Slack. And the answers on Discourse or Stack Overflow were not always helpful or friendly. And that sort of freaked me out from Julia. But since discovering Slack, it's actually, I realize it's not a toxic place.
So
I just changed my title to say "Go to the Slack."
Yeah, and all the listeners just go to the Slack
right now. I mean, it is a great. I mean, yeah, because there's a certain difference between package documentation, which is kind of like trying to cater to everybody, and it's very difficult because you're always supposed to write to your audience, right? Yeah, that's what everyone says: write to your audience, right? But like when you're a package author, you're like, okay, who is my audience? Is it a senior mathematician who's been doing this for 30 years and knows everything inside and out? They know exactly what word they're searching for. Or is it a grad student who's maybe new to the field and needs a bit more different of an introduction? Or is it someone that's computational? Is it a biologist who just happens to be going into the algebraic field? Like, who's your audience when you're writing package documentation is hard. But when you go to a Slack conversation, you know who your audience is because it's this person right in front of you, right? So I think it is very helpful to kind of get to that level where it's more personal.
Yeah, which is why I'm glad that you changed your title into the Slack page, because that's the point. Write for your audience, but your audience also needs to know where to find you. If the audience doesn't know where to look for you, then you're writing for the audience, but the audience is lost.
This is true, and I think so. As far as I'm aware, and I will need Chris to correct me on this, is that when Logan Kilpatrick was the community manager or a community manager, there was this bot running that would take new Julia questions on Stack Overflow and repost them to the Slack
Stack
such
Overflow.
that people would be aware to go back to Stack Overflow and answer them there, actually.
I think it's still running.
Is it still running, though?
I believe so. I still get pings from it, I think. Yeah, but I mean, the Stack Overflow is kind of dead as a website, but I don't know if you've seen those charts of how it's gone down over time. Like the introduction to ChatGPT and then like Stack Overflow usage, it has like gone down 10x or something. But yeah, for a while, yeah. I mean, we had some different bots that were trying to help bring everything to the Slack because that was where it was easier to find everybody in these kind of communication hubs, right? Because there's kind of difference between communication that you write out there that's static online versus, these tools where you can kind of catch the right people at the right time, right? But yeah, so it sounds like, so you did a lot with this computational algebra space. You're doing a lot with, Nemo and all these kinds of tools. But suddenly, on all these things are pretty computationally expensive, right? I mean, these are not things that you want to kind of do in your own computer. So you started running a whole lot of these bigger computations, and you want to start doing a bunch of things on HPCs and everything. And finally, you're like, I'm fed up. I want to start working on some workflows. And so you started building out some distributed workflows tooling. Can you describe a little bit more about exactly what you targeted in there to make that be, like easier to use, or like what was your main frustration with using HPCs that you're like, I'm going to make this easy?
Okay, so maybe I'll start with the history of how I was actually introduced to the backend tool. I had freshly finished my master thesis and I was discussing potential PhD topics with my supervisor. And for some reason, he had extreme overconfidence in me. And he was like, you're a mathematician. Parallel computing is no big deal for you. You will understand it. I was like, okay, if you say so, I'll trust you. And I would say to some aspect he's right. I understand the theoretical workings of how parallel computing, distributed computing works. But then I was introduced to this tool, which is developed again in Kaiserslautern by a research institute. It's not that easy to use. Also, my main problem with the tool was I spent about a year and a half trying to understand how to write a hello world example using that tool. So pretty much a hello world workflow that would run in a distributed manner. And I first tried it locally because I don't want the cluster manager to scream at me for occupying resources. Once I figured it out, I was like, okay, I'm still not comfortable, but I understand the different components of it. I know how to write it down. Can I reuse at least parts of it for a different application, which might follow a similar pattern? And the answer I was told was, no. Well, new application, new workflow, new writing of everything. All the components need to be rewritten because it's not usable. Like, okay, I'm not very happy about it, but I'm still learning about HPC, so let's see. And I remember the defining moment of when I decided to actually seriously work on distributed workflows as a package was when I had to revive an older student's application, which was, so the publication was stuck because the computation was not entirely finished. So I had to revive it. And in order to revive it, I ended up rewriting the entire application.
Just get this code running on a new cluster. I fell for that one before too.
The sad part was it was not even the new cluster. It was the exact same cluster.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's not good.
Because there were some libraries that were updated, everything just broke. Everything fell apart. So I had to rewrite. Of course, I would have to say I didn't rewrite it on my own. It was help from the institute and actually my collaborator on distributed workflows. And he guided me on how to rewrite it. And after that, I was like, I need something which is easier. I need something. I'm not an HPC expert. I want to focus on my research and not on rewriting the same tool over and over again. To answer your question, distributed workflows pretty much comes from a user-centric perspective, that it should be easier for the user to use a tool and not for the developer. It's very painful as a developer, but as a user, I'm very happy with it.
But you are now using distributed workflows as well in your own work, right? So this is not purely a gift to the community that you cannot reap the benefits.
That's all of open
yourself.
source, man. Don't call us all out. We're all just making things for ourselves and then say it's for everyone else. Come on.
I'm very happy that I as I said, mathematicians are lazy. So I spent together with my collaborator a lot of time writing this interface. So now that I'm writing my thesis, if I have to change something, I don't have to rewrite the entire application. I just go to Julia, load the package, and if my workflow changes, which changes pretty much on a weekly basis right now, it's just a few lines of code versus a few hundred lines of code.
That's pretty cool. So I had a look at the package, and it's built on this notion of Petri nets.
Yeah.
And I've never stumbled across them before, even though I am a computer scientist, right? So what are Petri nets? They looked pretty cool.
Yeah, so the interesting part is I'm a mathematician, and neither did I ever. I mean, I knew the concept of Petri nets, but I never came across it in terms of computations.
Mhm.
But Petri nets were developed by mathematicians, handed over to computer scientists, and then it sort of took off into the industry. So in the research, we don't really work on them as much. Petri net, if you want to consider, is a framework to define your workflow. If I were to give you an example, you can think of it as, which is where my operation research experience comes into play. Imagine you go to a restaurant or a coffee shop. Let's consider a coffee shop. You enter a coffee shop, you probably want a certain kind of a drink. You place an order, maybe there is a pastry rack, you want something from there. You tell them what you want, and then you go take your seat. But while you're providing that information, there are a few other people who have joined you in the queue. And then you go take your seat. Once your order is ready, you're called out. You go and make the payment, you collect your order, and you move on. And the next person comes in, and the next person comes in. A Petri net can be viewed as a diagram that describes this entire process. So if you're walking in, so there are vertices, and if I describe it in terms of graphs, it's a bipartite graph, which means there are two kinds of nodes. Ones are called places, the others are called transition. Places fire tokens, i.e. the person who enters the coffee shop. Your transition is your counter where you place your order, and the barista or the person standing behind the counter processes, which is the transition's job to process your information, and then delivers the output back to you, or maybe it was an order for someone else. So that's how I would explain it to someone who doesn't know what Petri nets are.
Yeah, I will say, just to have continuity with our other episodes. So if you have not been watching our other episodes, you should like and subscribe to this channel. But just to make a note, I mean, we did recently talk with Jacob Zelko, and Jacob Zelko did a lot with computational category theory, right? Putting the category theory parts aside, I'm sorry I had to talk with someone in category theory, but a lot of what he did with algebraic algebraic models in epidemiology, those are actually using Petri nets to represent the systems of differential equations as well. So Petri nets do seem to show up a lot, especially in the Julia landscape. Just wanted to throw that out there. So if you're interested in another discussion, go check out the other episode.
Also, I should say that Petri nets are much more powerful than other workflows that I've seen, especially in terms of DAGs. If you know, the acyclic, directed acyclic graphs.
Yep.
Because as the name suggests, it's acyclic, but Petri nets can be cyclic. So you can have an arc going in and out of the same place.
Mm-hmm. So you could have a recursive workflow then, right? Where you're saying like, okay, compute this, check the output, and if you don't like it yet, go back to computing it. And you want to do all that and say, here's my fully recursive workflow, and now put this onto a cluster for me and run it, right?
Yes. Yeah, and if you actually have designed a few of your own parallel versions, you would notice certain patterns are reoccurring, like this recursive pattern. And with the underlying tool, you couldn't reuse your Petri net, but with distributed workflows, you can reuse the Petri net you designed, and you just need to tell the Petri net which Julia code to execute. So your Julia code can keep on changing but
Mhm.
your Petri net is fixed.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Yeah, because a lot of people have focused on like, oh, you have graph representations of your code, and now I'm going to distribute this for you. But Dask focuses on DAGs, directed acyclic graphs. Dagger.jl focuses on DAGs, right? You have all these things that are always DAG, 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 DAG. But here you're like, okay, I do actually have cycles in what I want to compute, but there's no real workflow out there. Everyone is, I mean, because I think there's a lot of really nice theory for parallel computing folks that be like, oh, I can really make an optimal thing to do with DAGs, right? And then you're like, well, I don't have a DAG, so I don't want your optimal DAG compiler. I just want something that actually works in my case. And this is the first one that seems to do this for Petri nets, which allows for cyclic.
Me still trying to wrap my head around Petri nets. Can I think of it as sort of an abstraction for concurrent programming in a way? Like is it a concurrent programming model, or is it?
It's multitasking. You can do concurrent programming, but the main power of it lies in multitasking. I unfortunately don't have any of the printouts of my diagrams here, but if you go to the documentation, there you would, even in our logo, you would see a Petri net with multiple tokens. So that can be, I would say, if I'm not wrong, that could be considered as a concurrent execution. But you can have a much larger one where multiple processes get started at the same time.
Well, I'm going to pull it up. Here we go.
Oh, I think this is the first.
Yeah, this is the hello world, which took me a year and a half to write in the underline tool. But with Julia, it's much easier.
Yeah, so you want to run hello world here with a bunch of different inputs, right? So you say, okay, I guess I want to have some file here that I have like n different files, and I want to run hello world on n different computers, and I want to be able to spit it out, right? Yeah. But now, like, I guess the key innovation you got here is that you're not just like, oh, it's not just able to go in one direction. I can also have it check the output file, and I can have an arrow that goes back to here and say, okay, if I see this output, then actually generate this new input and keep on going through. You wouldn't do that with Hello World, but I mean, so it seems like you'd be able to handle some very complex scenarios here, where then you'd be able to take that and distribute it, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes. So in case you have multiple tasks or multiple data points that have to do the same task, this thing can be launched in multiple processes, and the same workflow can do the same task but with a different variant of the code. However, let me see if I have a Petri net to show. No, that's the hello world. Unfortunately, sometimes I'm also lazy. I have the workflow, but I don't have the nice image of it.
I think that okay. So what are the current things that you're really focusing on in terms of your distributed workflows? Then, right? It seems like you got something good together. Like, what are the parts that you think are really strong about DistributedWorkflows.jl right now that you're like, okay, someone should really adopt it for this reason, right? Are you like, okay, the backend is strong, it does all the serialization for you, a lot of things to do with serialization, pre-compilation. I know that for example, when you have to compile your code for whole clusters, you want to compile it locally, and then you want to distribute the binary and stuff. Like, how strong is the backend for doing things? But also, how good is the front end right now for it's very easy to use, setup, and everything? Or what's the good parts? What's the parts with sharp edges right now? What are you still working on? What are the parts that you tell people, like, I know that you should use this?
I have two ways of answering that question. So one aspect is actually for people who have used the underlying tool and have sort of a PTSD from it. Because I think I also link to GPI space how to use. And if you go there and you keep scrolling and you keep scrolling and you keep scrolling, and the how to use is the hello world example. And there is a bunch of C++, XML, more C++ that you have to write before you can get anything running. With the Julia version, our attempt was to simplify that task. So can you repeat the question again? Because I'm jumping ahead of myself.
Yeah, well, I'm just kind of wondering, so you got a package here, and it seems like it has some pretty cool capabilities that, people can't necessarily do with something like Dagger or .jl or Dask, right? But now I'm kind of curious, like, what would you say are like the strong points of the package right now? Is it like, the back end, its execution model, how good is, how the performance and the overhead that give are really, the performance is high, the overheads are low? Or would you say that the front end is like, I've got the front end really good, and like, so it's really easy to use, and I'm still working on some performance things here and there, but so like, where would you point to that's like, this is the best part right now? This is the holy grail of what I've got good.
Okay, so now I understood your question better. I would say it's the front end, so the Julia end, which is
Mhm.
very robust because we rely on Julia, and also you mentioned something about serialization. One thing,
Mhm.
distributed workflows is independent of the serializer. So you can use Julia serializer, you can use your favorite serializer that Julia supports. You mentioned Oscar, for example, has its own serializer and it keeps on changing and updating.
Mhm.
Made sure it would work with any serializer that Julia permits. So you're not forced into using a fancy serializer that I've written. You can have your own data structures. If you can serialize it, you can use it.
Okay, cool.
And the other feature of distributed workflows, which might not seem true right now if you're not familiar with the backend tool, it's much more easier to use. In terms of performance, this is currently still recommended for large computations that you have to launch on clusters, because there is some overhead from the backend coming in, which is why I'm also not very happy with using a non-native backend tool, which we can dive into further if you like, because I really want to have it also linked with, for example, distributed package in Julia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I am curious. I do see that it's built to work with SPAC in the background.
Sorry?
Is it built to work with SPAC, or what's the relationship with SPAC?
Spec actually builds the binaries, and you need spec
Mm-hmm.
to load the binaries on the system. So for example, if you're launching it on a cluster, you need a shared file system where you
Mm-hmm.
download and unwrap the binaries, and then once your binaries are there, you can start Julia in the regular fashion and
Mm-hmm.
And this
download
is
the
like,
package and load it. Yeah.
and I guess this is because if you're working on the cluster, you might not have a Julia installed on every node. So spec is there that once the tasks are distributed over the cluster, that all the nodes definitely have the same Julia environment.
Well, the other data.
No, it's actually the other way around. It's the backend might not be available everywhere. That's why we also wrap it, because the backend is also a little heavy duty. So we wrap it in the binary, and we only bring the components which are actually used for Julia, because there is more aspects of it. So if you download the native or the backend in pure, it takes a really long time, and it downloads a bunch of things that only advanced users might need. The current package is more in terms of launching parallel workflows in the form of tasks, different tasks and different processes. That's the only aspect from GPI space that I need, and that's what we are packaging. So spec is actually required to make sure that GPI space exists and can be accessed. But Julia, as far as I tried on at least one cluster I have access to, is not that difficult to set up.
Yeah, the access to clusters is always one of the reasons why it's so painful. Because whenever you switch institutions, it seems you have to start afresh to learn the ins and outs.
Yeah, which is why I was thinking if there is a second backend to something natively Julia, we also drop the dependency of outside packages. Because I have also experienced discussing it with IT and cluster managers, and every time it's like, okay, I need this dependency and that dependency, and every time you have to justify why you need it.
Yeah, it's very difficult to, cluster managers are definitely one of those things where it's not even just a Julia thing, right? It's just in general, just working with different cluster managers is like, every cluster is its own special snowflake, and anything that makes it so that way you can more easily move one code to a new cluster without having to rewrite everything from scratch is a major hours of time saved for people who have to do this a lot.
And having said that, I have to say that I really appreciate all the IT personnel. I am not complaining. You actually make my life easy. So if I had to set up my own stuff, it would drive me crazy.
That's the one person in the the various institutes who's always underpaid. Like,
Yes.
you just cannot imagine how less work is done. Modular correct English. How less work is done when the IT guy that administrates the cluster is on sick leave. Like everything comes to a grinding halt.
Well, yeah, because then every single undergrad runs a job that takes 30 days to run, and you know, like it's just hello world 180 billion times, right? And so then everyone's just like, oh, now we can't use the cluster until they come back and kill the jobs manually, right? So they're a superhero that never gets the love that they deserve.
Yes, they're underpaid and underappreciated.
So shout out to all the sysadmins that
we
made our lives better.
The Julia Dispatch podcast loves sysadmins.
Yeah. One other thing that I wanted to mention here again, we already briefly touched upon it in the gender inclusiveness episode, was that you once had this discussion with someone about, okay, so you're telling me if I want to use the cluster, I need to understand it like in this absurd level of depth.
Yeah.
And this would be akin to, say, if I want to extend my screen, I need to have a working understanding of the physics and chemistry of the screen before I'm allowed to plug in the cable. I really like this analogy. When I first heard you say it, some sort of objection was starting to rise in me, because I also had to learn the ins and outs of a cluster, and I was like, yeah, no, but clusters are different than screens. And then like, no, actually, she really has a point there. And so how did this come along, and like, what are the reactions that you got so far when you used this?
Oh, you mean when I use the analogy?
Yeah.
In the meantime, I've actually come up with another Julia-related analogy, which is imagine you start to learn a programming language. Let's pick Julia. What would be your initial approach?
Write a differential equation solver.
Or how do you do that? You need someone. You either look up some introductory course on YouTube or on the documentation, and you try that out. Now imagine if I told you, before you even touch a single line of code in the REPL, you first have to understand how Julia is written, how it's compiled, how it's interpreted. Once you understand all of that, then we come to writing actual code. The underlying tool is somewhat like that. And I understand if HPC experts are going to really hate me for this, but I am not an HPC expert. I am a mathematician. I want to continue my research, but I have computations which cannot be handled sequentially. And everywhere I went, like within the research group or even during conferences, when I came across HPC experts, I was like, isn't there a tool that can do that? And the answer usually was like, yeah, there are even industry standards. Like, okay, can you give me the name of a few that I can use? And they would suggest something and I would look it up. And then I'm like, yeah, but this is not a user-friendly interface. And again, I would get, yeah, but you need to understand how it works before you can use it. No, why do I need to understand what it needs to do as long as I know what it's doing? And it's the application that needs to run in parallel. I don't need to understand how workflows are deployed on a cluster. I just know that it should be done and I should receive the output in appropriate time.
Yeah. Well, I've always felt like a good way to approach anything high tech in life is always like doing something high tech well is a relentless pursuit of basically proving that you don't need to be there. And what I mean by that is, like, like, how do you know that a math project has done well? You've solved it so well that you don't need to exist anymore. Like, it's written down so that way someone could read your paper, and in 1 year they're like, okay, I understand everything this person's ever done, right? And I think that it's kind of, like, I feel like a lot of people in a high tech space, they feel like they have to justify themselves and be like, oh, someone has to understand everything that I know in order to use this program. But it's like, that the program is good when people don't need to understand anything of what you've ever thought about, and they can use a program and go, oh, distributed programming is easy. You just use this thing and it's all done, right? Like, when you no longer need to exist, that's when you've got it well. So I like your mindset there.
That was honestly another driving force towards distributed workflows, because I don't want to be contacted by you, and it's not because I'm trying to be pretentious or anything, but I believe that you should be able to use this package without reaching out to me. If you have to reach out to me, I did something wrong.
Well, while you're on here, I'm just going to say you haven't filled out the example section of your documentation yet. So
Which is why I'm waiting for people to take notice and start opening up issues. The more you complain, the faster it will be done.
All right, you heard it here first, folks. Write comments below. What do you want to see in the package documentation?
Or open issues directly on GitHub.
Or
And
open issues,
we'll
but
link
comments will get us
to the
more.
GitHub.
Comments will get us more engagement. Come on.
So I don't
No, but I mean,
say about other people, but I would say if you complain to me about distributed workflows, I would welcome it with open arms. And right now we need people who would try it out and give us suggestions. Like Michael, you said you tried it out, and as soon as you mentioned what went wrong, I knew exactly what happened, which is, again, takes me back to my tasks that I need to finish right after my PhD.
I'm now wondering to have whether to dive deeper still into this analogy of okay, what is just the best interface for working with workflows? But now that you mention it, I'm going to take it to this other route. So I loved this interaction between us in the build up to this episode, where I tried to get the package running on my computer. It didn't load, and I was like, what's currently the state of things? And you said, yeah, it's not yet as robust as I would like it to be, but it will get there. And this, when we had this exchange, it reminded me a lot of things that I hear from other PhD students. Is I need to polish the code before I publish it, but then I'll upload it in a couple of days, and then those turn into weeks, and those turn into months, and then if you just ping them enough, sometimes you get something, but often it will just never be uploaded. But you said, no, I'm actually really happy about where it is, even if it's work in progress. How do you feel about this? And what do you tell people that, or what should I tell people when they say to me, oh, I need to polish the code first before I can put it up?
Okay, so I would say in terms of the back-end development, so creating the connection to GPI space, there's not much to do, because we made sure it's well tested, it doesn't fail, and we tried out a bunch of prototypes before we settled on one that we were really happy with. What's lacking is more on the front end side, to add additional features, like advanced features of having regular patterns, so you don't have to even write your own pattern. We provide you with a easy macro or a method that you can just call and provide it with parameters that would design your workflow for you. But yeah, what you mentioned is just part of my life. I'm never happy with my work. Even while writing my thesis, I'm never happy with it. But there comes a time when you have to be like, if I don't send it out now, I would keep on working on it. Every time I'm like, I need a few more days. I need a few more days. And imagine if we had the same treatment towards art or music. We would never hear another exceptional piece, because the musician would keep on being afraid that this is not ready for the audience yet.
But how did you overcome this fear of letting it go and say, okay, I'm not yet satisfied with it, but I know that I will never be satisfied, so I might do it now, right? Because that is the point where other people struggle, where they do not get to the conclusion, okay, if I'm never going to be satisfied with it, then I have to just publish it. But you just said, okay, this is going to be now, might as well be it.
So to be honest, I haven't been able to figure out a way where I'll be happy with it. But I started, and I have this habit of planning my life in chunks of 5 or 10 years. And every time I say this to someone, they freak out because for some reason it's difficult for people to imagine 5 years from now. But if I don't do that, there are so many tasks I want to do which will never be done. So I have a bunch of calendar reminders, which my friends say unnecessary alarms, which so every day my phone will go off with 5 calendar reminders. And if a calendar reminder goes off, it has to be sent in that day. If I don't do it, then I have other ways of annoying myself. So sometimes I freak out people because they might think I have split personalities, because I have this super chaotic version of me who wants to improve everything. And then there's this disciplined version who says, okay, it's enough, send it out. And then I sit after sending it out, or after publishing something, I take a week off, and then I overthink it to the point that is not healthy. But eventually I pick myself up and I'm like, okay, now it's out, which means it's more pressure to improve it further.
Mm-hmm.
I think as an educator, I also have this weird habit of waiting for someone to point out, like, this is missing or that is missing, so I can add it to the list of tasks I have to do.
Well, the way that I've always kind of taken this is there's an old adage about how Airbnb actually launched, right? I don't know if you all have heard this one. So the way that Airbnb launched is that they had a launch party, right? And like I think 2 people showed up to the launch party. So what they did was like 2 weeks later they had a launch party where they just said, this is the first release of Airbnb, and like 5 people showed up. And then so that about a month later they had the first release of Airbnb, and like 10 people showed up. And then they had the first release of Airbnb, and then like 1,000 people showed up, and it really took off, right? And like it got all the presses and everything, right? And I think that the key thing is, like, if your stuff doesn't work, then people just won't even notice it. Like people only notice it when it works anyways, really. So like you're kind of okay just to kind of put it out there and just be like, oh, like let it fly. And but like, it's like a young bird, right? You let it fly, and if you put the bird out too early, it just won't fly. But it'll fly when it wants to, right? You just develop in the open, and you see what it does itself. So I really think that a lot of people who really get into open source have that kind of mentality of I'm not going to wait till it's perfect, because it's never going to be perfect, right? You just at a certain point you just got to say, well, how am I going to get anyone else to help me out on finishing it if I have to finish it before I put it out there? Well, open source, everyone else wants to develop too, so let's be a party, right?
Yeah, this actually reminds me of something. There's a guy, if I'm not butchering his name, he's called Simon Sinek or Simon Sinek. He's a motivational speaker, and there is this one particular video that I keep seeing where he was asked about how when you come up with a product idea or with a business idea, how do you take it out to the investors? And his response was that he is not targeting the population that would use it once my product is stable. He is targeting the people who are early investors, who like early birders. They see the potential. They're not fully convinced, but they see the potential, and they would be happy to give it a try, to use it. So I would say right now that was more like the motivation we had to launch it, and also to present it at JuliaCon, to find those early investors of time and energy.
Well, and I think the other nice thing with with that too is that you also find in the open source community who your real user base is, right? I
Yeah.
think when I started writing a lot of the differential equation solvers, I thought I was doing a lot of stochastic differential equation stuff because, like, oh, there are ODE solvers in MATLAB and stuff. Like, everyone has ODE solvers, but no one has adaptive SDE solvers. So, like, this is what I'm going to do. Adaptive SDE solvers, everything's in stochastic differential equations. And when I did that, I also wrote some ODE solvers. They ended up being a little bit faster than Fortran ones. And I was like, yeah, some ODE solvers are a little bit faster than the Fortran ones. And like thousands of people started using that. And like 2 people were using the SD solvers. And I was like, all right, I think I know what to start working on more then. Right. So
Yeah, building on that, I was extremely disappointed. So when I was even before writing distributed workflows, I was like, let me see. Julia has such a large ecosystem. There has to be something that exists based on Petri nets. And to my surprise, I did find something based on Petri nets, but then I got disappointed because it's restricted to, I think, ODEs or PDEs.
Yep.
And that's the only thing you can do.
Algebraic Petri.jl. Yep.
It was hurting me and making me happy at the same time, because like, okay, other people know about Petri nets, but why do you restrict it to just one aspect?
Everything's a differential equation.
But you can write workflows which are not differential equations, and then I didn't know how to translate them to differential equations.
Well, here's a real question for a mathematician. Can you write every workflow as a differential equation? Because if you make differential equations into an entire Turing complete language, then there you go. But
now my question is, am I allowed to come up with or enhance the definition of what a differential equation is? Remember, I'm a theoretical mathematician. I will create mathematics if it doesn't exist.
Oh, for sure.
So actually, this is already done. Like, it is known that differential equations are Turing complete, and people are working on expressing things in differential equations and working out the complexity theory about this and all that. But that's a story for another day.
I didn't know about that, so that's no.
Yeah, we must be talking about algebraic geometry because that's definitely a tangent.
I want to go back to this once more, and I say I admire that you decided to put it out. And if anyone's listening here, working on the little package and are uncertain whether they should release it or whether they should just polish something out of the code, like, the process is go through it once to see if there's any secrets that you're not allowed to have kept in the files, and once that is deleted, then everything else goes on, no matter how hacky it is. And
but don't just delete your secrets. You have to make sure they're not in your Git history.
Yeah. But other than that, like,
say a little something. Maybe a better practice would be, which I know even you might disagree with me, but my habit is to document as I go. So I write one method or write one macro and then I document it right away. That makes it much easier also for me to remember what I was doing, because maybe I'm working on it now and then 3 months later I go back to it and like, why was I writing this method? I don't see the point of it. So if you have stuff documented, it feels very annoying to write doc strings, but at the end of the day, it's very helpful. And also then it feels much nicer than just having hundreds of thousands of lines of code.
Yeah.
You know what I've actually thought about doing along those lines? Maybe you could try putting this hack into play. So I've thought about doing this where you say, you have GitHub Copilot or one of these things, right? Where once you're done with the function, you say, hey, create a doc string, and it's kind of along these lines, right? You just write one sentence or something, and then you put that there and you say, here's a GitHub Copilot generated doc string, take it as you will, and you just paste it there. Boom. And then move on to the next one. That's a good way to get the documentation started while you're still writing.
I mean, there are places like deep in the internals of differential equation solvers that I at some point wanted to hack a little bit, and it was just undocumented, which meant it was, okay, this is internal API, this is not supposed to be public, and it was like, yeah, but I still want to extend this very little piece, and then I was like, okay, I can't figure it out in finite time. I'll wait until some other things
Well,
will
you
be
want to know
merged, then
how
maybe
to
it
solve
works.
those problems? You could go to the Slack channel and ask the
Yeah, yeah.
developers, and that's a way to get into the internals and start working on hacking with other
Yeah,
people
yeah.
on these packages.
Yeah, but I agree with like try to document everything. It's not for other people. It's for you in 3 months or like 3 weeks if you have little kids, or 3 days maybe even.
Yeah, the future you will thank you.
So, Chris, is there anything else about distributed workflows that currently is occupying your mind?
I don't think so. I think that what we should probably do is we should probably ask about the future, right? So I guess Firoozeh, you're, and I think that's the first time I've ever used the name of the actual person when in the show. You're in the process of wrapping up your PhD, right? Have you come up with what you're going to be doing next? Academia, mathematics, open source software. What are your plans in mind?
So currently I'm looking for jobs, and it's kind of complicated. My dream job would be to eventually become a professor and have my own research team, and I would put them through similar things that I went through as a PhD student, maybe not as much, but to have my own little team of minions working on open source code. But if not, then I'm also open to industry positions, but I would continue working on distributed workflows because this is something I don't want to call it my baby, but this is more like something I feel like there are more people like me out there who want to use a tool like this, but they either don't have the energy or the time to write it down. And since we're talking about future, and we previously talked about opening up issues and commenting, if anyone is willing to be part of the developer team, because on the Julia end, I'm the only one working, which is also why a lot of features take time, because I need to take out time from my research or my work-life balance to actually develop stuff. So if there are people who are interested in writing aspects of the Julia side, I would be more than happy to give you a few easy tasks to get your hands dirty into the HPC system. But if not, then I would request your patience. So once I am done with my PhD, I'll get back to developing more for distributed workflows and maybe some other package.
So we heard it here. If Petri nets is something that sounds cool to you, but you need them outside of differential equations, distributed workflows is the package that
Or
you
if you
should
want to
all...
use them to distribute differential equations, don't be a hater.
Or HPC made easy for everyone.
Mhm.
That's
the key.
my main,
That's the key.
yes, that's my main focus. That it's not just for experts. Everyone should be treated equally. Everyone should be able to use it.
So in a hypothetical world where now that the call to action is out there and there's a huge influx of new developers into distributed workflows, would there be something else that would also pique your interest with development, or would you just like triple down on distributed workflows and it would solve HPC forever?
I wish, but it won't solve HPC forever, but maybe a small aspect of it. And yeah, I would love to have more time to work on distributed workflows itself, because I currently have a really long list of not just features that I would like to add, but also different kinds of backends that I would like to support, and maybe have maybe that might not be right for distributed workflows, but a different package where all these HPC workflows come together. For example, if you want to use DAGs, you can use DAGs. If you want to use Petri nets, you can use that. That could be a potential package. And thinking more mathematically, there is also the desire in me to have a package which works for tropical computations. I mean, I've seen bits and scattered packages here and there in Julia and other computer algebra systems, but they don't seem to be standardized, or maybe written in a way that I feel comfortable recommending it to someone. So I wouldn't reinvent the wheel. I would try to bring, at least at the Julia level, I would try to look what exists and then build on top of those.
You're not going to reinvent the wheel, but you will fork the wheel.
Yes. And I wish I could pile on to that. I'm not that creative.
But then if you have forked the wheel, then you have a bicycle, and then this will get you real places. That sounds lovely. I'm very much looking forward to this future. In the meantime, all the best for the upcoming PhD wrap up, and then I'm also very much looking forward to when the next time you'll be on the show and tell us about the progress and the stuff that has happened with tropical algebra in the meantime.
That would be exciting. Or maybe next time I tell you what advancements have happened in distributed workflows. So
Exactly.
maybe the spec requirement is removed and we are building with pure Julia binary builders. If I figure that out eventually.
All right. Thanks you a lot, Firoozeh, to being on the show again, to your time, and to all the work that you've put into distributed workflows.
Thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure talking to you guys.
Yeah, and anyone who's still here and listening, subscribe, please do.
But so I wanted to come back to this earlier. I mean, isn't the same argument for the high tech also apply to us? Like, if we do it right, then we'd have no subscribers or no comments because it was just a perfect conversation.
Yeah. I mean, the whole point of putting media out there, right, is you just have to do something so wrong that it generates controversy, and that's how it gets popular, right?
Yeah. All right.
The real question
So HPC makes code slower. You heard it here first.
Let me ask you, do you really want to create a controversy? Because these days, that's very easy.
Oh, definitely. I'm from the United States. I understand.
All right. With that being said, thanks everyone for listening. Maybe comment below just to say Chris was wrong, and then.
But don't tell us exactly what. Just like a blanket statement, like just say somewhere in between minute 1 and minute 60.
And then go join the Slack and tell us, no, it's actually not that bad. Or maybe it is that bad, and you can also tell us. I feel fine with it. And then, yeah, we'll be back with another episode soon.
Ciao.
Bye.